Good morning. Could you have some order, please? Welcome to the joint legislative budget hearing on public protection. I'm Senator Catherine Young, Chair of the Senate Finance Committee. Pursuant to the state constitution and legislative law, the fiscal committees of the state legislature are authorized to hold hearings on the executive budget proposal. Today's hearing will be limited to a discussion on the governor's proposed budget for public protection. Following each presentation, there will be some time allowed for questions from the chairs of the fiscal committees and other legislators. I would like to welcome Judge Lawrence K. Marks, Chief Administrative Judge of the Office of Court Administration, John P. Melville, Executive Deputy Commissioner of the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Michael C. Green, Executive Deputy Commissioner of the Division of Criminal Justice Services, Anthony J. Annucci, Acting Commissioner of the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, Joseph A. D'Amico, Superintendent of the Division of State Police, and Margaret Miller, Director and Chief Information Officer of the Office of Information Technology Services. At this time, I would like to begin with testimony of Judge Lawrence K. Marks, Chief Administrative Judge of the Office of Court Administration. Welcome and good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank
you.
Before
we begin, though, Assemblyman Farrell, who keeps me in line, reminded me that we need to introduce our members. So if you hold on one second, I'd like to introduce Senator Liz Krueger, who is ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Michael Nozzolio, who is chair of the Senate Codes Committee, Senator Patrick Gallivan, who is chair of the Crime and Corrections Committee, Senator Fred Akshar, Senator Rich Funke, Senator Joe Adabo, Senator John Bonisic, Senator Diane Savino, and Senator Marty Golden. Assemblyman?
We've been joined by Assemblywoman Chair Weinstein, Assemblyman Lenthal, Attendant O'Donnell, and Assemblyman People Stokes. We also have Mr. Oakes, who will give us his names.
Thank you, Chairman. We've been joined also by Assemblyman Giglio, Assemblyman Montesano, Assemblyman Graff, and Assemblywoman Maliatakis.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, Judge, we do welcome you once again, and we're ready for your testimony.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Lawrence Marks. I'm the Chief Administrative Judge of the courts, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today about the Unified Court System's budget request. And I'd just like to take 10 minutes, if I may, to lay out the key issues in our budget request, and then, of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. But just before I do that, I'd like to make note of our new Chief Judge, Janet DiFiore, just confirmed by the Senate 2 weeks ago. Everyone in the court system is excited about Judge DiFiore assuming the leadership of the judiciary. The governor certainly made a terrific decision in nominating her. And on behalf of her and the entire court system, I want to say that we very much look forward to continuing to work closely and cooperatively with the legislature in the coming years. So, turning to our budget request, I would start by providing some brief context. In fiscal year 2009-2010, the general fund state operations portion of the court system's budget was approximately $1.78 billion. Today, 6 years later, that amount is approximately $1.85 billion, an increase of only $64 million, or 3.5%, which averages out to about 0.6% of an increase each year over that 6-year period. Yet during that same period of time, the judiciary has absorbed nearly $400 million in higher costs. These higher costs include mandated employee salary increases, increased contractual expenses, funding for indigent criminal defense to meet statutory caseload standards, and funding for civil legal services. And because our budget is overwhelmingly, roughly 90% salaries and fringe benefits, We've managed to do this, that is, absorb increased costs that have been far higher than the very minimal increases in our budget allocations. We've been able to do this primarily by decreasing our employment levels. Indeed, the number of non-judicial employees in the court system has decreased by about 2,000 since the year 2009, which is a 12% reduction in our workforce. That means we have fewer court officers, fewer court clerks, court reporters, court interpreters, court attorneys, back office staff, and so on. And although we've worked tirelessly to try to minimize the impact of this through innovation and streamlining, and in our budget submission, we highlight steps we've taken in that regard. Those efforts have been only partially successful. Without question, we, and more importantly, the public, are still suffering consequences from our reduced staffing levels. These consequences include delays on some days in opening courtroom parts, delays in entering judgments in the clerk's offices, lines to get into the courthouses, lines to get into the lines in the clerk's offices, just to name a few of these consequences. So, given that context, this year we are asking for an increase in our budget. And while you've helped us with additional budgetary support in the past 2 years, this year our situation is a little more complicated. And I want to take a moment to explain that to you. As I think you know, under the state constitution, the judiciary is required to submit its proposed budget to the governor on the December 1st preceding the upcoming fiscal year. But this year, as we were preparing our budget request, and when we submitted it to the governor on December 1, the Commission on Legislative, Judicial, and Executive Compensation had not yet issued its findings and determinations with regard to judicial salary increases. Under the statute creating the Salary Commission, the Commission's findings and determinations as to judicial salaries were not due until the end of December. So by the time we were required by law to submit our proposed budget to the governor, we had no idea what the Salary Commission would be doing with regard to judicial salaries. We were certainly hopeful that the Commission would be voting for a judicial salary increase, but we had no idea what the salary levels would be, and therefore we had no idea how much they would cost. Consequently, what we did was note in our budget request that we were awaiting the Salary Commission's determinations and that we might well be seeking additional funding to pay for judicial salary increases, depending on what the Salary Commission ended up doing. As it happened, later that month, in December, the Salary Commission issued its report, which called for phased-in salary increases for New York judges using the federal district court judge salary as a benchmark and providing for the largest portion of the phase-in to take effect this April 1st. Now, I'm not planning on going into the details of the Salary Commission's findings now in my prepared remarks, but I'll certainly answer any questions that you may have about that this morning. But what I will say, however, is that we are extremely pleased with what the Commission did, and I would note that its findings and determinations were fully supported by the legislature's 2 representatives on the Commission. By using the federal salary as the benchmark, the Commission followed the precedent that was set by the last Commission in 2011, which in turn was the precedent that the legislature itself had used throughout much of the history of setting judicial salaries before the Commission process was enacted. Indeed, this Commission has finally and essentially resolved what has been a decades-long haphazard, inadequate, and frankly unfair process for setting judicial salaries. So we're extremely grateful for the Commission's findings and for the support of the legislature's representatives on the Commission, and through them we are extremely grateful to you for those findings. The problem, though, and this is the main issue I want to talk to you about and highlight for you this morning, is that the cost of the first year phase-in of the judicial salary increase, beginning on April 1st of this year, is $27 million. That's a cost we were not able to budget for when we submitted our proposed budget to the governor on December 1st for the reasons that I've explained. Our budget request submitted on December 1st sought a 2.4% increase in our general fund's operating budget, which is an increase of $44.4 million. An increase is necessary because we are again facing significant cost increases, which include mandatory salary increases for court employees, increases in contractual obligations, such as our contracts with local governments to provide courthouse security in certain portions of the state, annualization of the cost of the 5 additional family court judgeships that the legislature created effective January 1, 2016, and additional funding for civil legal services. But because of the additional cost of the judicial salary increases, a cost we could not estimate when we submitted our budget request on December 1st, we now must seek additional funding to meet that cost. What we are proposing to you and what we are respectfully urging you to support is an additional $19.6 million to help pay for the increased cost. We are proposing that we apply the 0.4% part of the 2.4% increase we requested in our December 1 submission, and that's the 0.4% part of that is about $7.4 million. We're proposing applying that toward the cost of the judicial salary increase. And then we are proposing that the legislature add to our budget the remaining $19.6 million of the full cost. That would pay for the cost of judicial salary increases in the upcoming fiscal year, and it would leave the courts with an increase of 2%, which is the governor's target, as we know, or $37 million in our operating budget to cover our increased expenses, including the mandated court employee salary increases, increased contractual expenses, and additional funding for civil legal services. We firmly believe that what we are seeking is fair and reasonable. The newly arising cost of the judicial salary increase has resulted from a statutory process that was designed to inject fairness, objectivity, and transparency into the method for determining judicial salaries. That statutory process worked, and the Salary Commission's determinations were fully supported by the legislature's 2 representatives on the commission. We respectfully submit that the fair thing to do now is to provide the funding to implement those results. Without that funding, it will be increasingly difficult to replace employees when they leave the court system, further decreasing our employment level and resulting in the consequences that will entail. With that funding, the judiciary will be able to provide the quality of service that we need to provide to the people of this state, a quality of service that we all agree the public fully deserves. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief Administrative Judge Marks. We have been joined by Senator Gustavo Rivera, and our first speaker will be Senator John Bonasek, who is chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning. Good to see you. Before I ask you some questions, I just would like to say that I always enjoy working with my counterpart, Helene Weinstein, who chairs the Judiciary in the Assembly. We've been having discussions how to work through this judiciary budget to try to be fair to all concerned. Your budget, I think, for court administration is between $2.8 and $2.9 billion. Would I be correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, we have a concern what we see happening in the court system. As you pointed out, a lack of staffing, shorter hours. We now see the Harrell Herring case, which basically stated that there's not enough district attorneys for first appearance for defendants in criminal actions. So for 5 counties that brought a lawsuit, monies were given to those 5 counties. So there's a need for more monies for criminal representation for mainly upstate. That's another developing future cost on the court system. As you know, you explained, it appears to me that the priorities are to take care of the judicial salaries, which we're all supportive of. We think the judges are deserving of raises. You're struggling with the 2% cap, how to live with all of this, with a judicial court system, with access to justice that is deteriorating rather than getting stronger. So when I look at your budget, one of the priorities, in addition to the raises, is civil services. Now, that item has jumped from 70 million to 85 million this year. So that's free legal services for civilian actions, civil servant, right? As opposed to criminal.
Civil cases.
Right. So middle-class families have to pay for legal fees, but there's a movement to have the poor have free legal services. I just point that out. I think for this year, that's a wrong priority. I think that part of the budget should be no gain, because last year they got a 15 million bump. They're up to $70 million now for free legal services for civil actions. And you now want to take it to 85. There's $15 million. If you kept that level, you would help reach your other priorities of making the court system stronger and or helping to support the raises. So I throw that out to you. I haven't asked your question yet. I have not asked you a question.
I'm waiting for the question.
Right. But things like CASA and the dispute resolution, I think these are very worthwhile services. A lot of them are on a volunteer basis. They help children and families in preventive action before it even gets to the courts. They help relieve court congestion. We did the divorce law amendments this past year. That's supposed to clean up 94% of matrimonial actions with court congestion. So we're trying. So I would say to you that those two volunteer programs are very helpful. You should look to see what you can do there.
And we are proposing to continue the funding for those programs in this budget.
So now I'm going to come to the $64,000, more than the $64,000 question. If the governor is insisting on the 2% cap, have you given any thought how you're going to reconcile making the court stronger, doing the judicial raises, and what has to be saved and what has to be cut?
Well, so and you're asking if we don't get additional money and we had to stay within the 2%, how would we cope with that?
Which the governor is kind of indicating that's where he wants to go. I'm not speaking for the governor, but I'm just...
If you read his commentary on our budget submission, that is what he said.
Yes.
That's right. So I'll answer that, but let me, if I could, let me just respond to your comments about civil legal services. And
could you speak it to the mic a little?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was saying, and I'll answer your question, but if I may just initially, if I could respond to your question about your comments about civil legal services. Look, this is a critically important program. I mean, everyone here on this panel, every member of the legislature should really support the money for civil legal services. Our program, that money goes to every single county in the state, all 62 counties. This is not a New York City program. It's not an upstate program. It's a statewide program. Every legislative district in this state has, every one of you has constituents that benefit from this money. You know, as you all know, there's a legal right in a criminal case. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided for you free of charge. There's no such right, generally speaking, in civil cases. And this is money that goes to provide lawyers, again, in every county in this state, people who are facing potential eviction, people who are facing potential foreclosure, victims of domestic violence in family court proceedings, veterans seeking disability payments. This is money that is very well spent. There have been studies done by economists that have concluded that for every dollar spent on civil legal services, government can save as much as $6, and that's because if someone's evicted or their house is foreclosed on, or they don't receive federal benefits, that leads to further problems and further costs imposed on government. This is a critically important program that I really can't emphasize enough that everyone here should really be supporting. And this last $15 million that we're seeking in this budget is the last installment in a plan that was announced 5 years ago, 6 years ago, where each year, and by the way, each year in years that were fiscally much weaker than this particular year, where the state economy is relatively strong now, the legislature provided money for each of the last 4 or 5 years, and this would be the last installment that would get us to $100 million, which will meet the goal that we set for funding civil legal services. So, again, I really can't emphasize enough how this is a program that benefits people throughout the state in all 62 counties, and I would urge that you support the additional funding that we're seeking for civil legal services. Having said that, if in the doomsday scenario, where we don't get any additional money, and this is to answer your question, Senator Bonasek, what would we do? Well, you know, we don't have a lot of choices in the judiciary budget, since we're roughly 90% salaries and fringe benefits. We don't have a capital budget. We don't have, other than civil legal services, we don't have a whole lot of programs that we could cut. We're primarily people, and that's what makes up the vast percentage of our budget. So if we had to absorb the full cost of this judicial salary increase, the $27 million, you know, we would have to look at attrition, not replacing people when they leave the court system, which is how we managed far more difficult budgets going back to 2011, where we sustained a massive budget cut that year, which resulted in layoffs that year because the budget cut was so extreme. And that was followed by 2 years of flat budgets. And the way we managed that, because every year our costs go up, they don't go down, costs go up. So the way we managed that those years was through attrition. When people left, we didn't replace them. We had a strict hiring freeze. So if we were not successful in getting this additional money, we would inevitably have to look at attrition, not replacing people when they leave, and we would have to look at the civil legal services money as well, as you've suggested.
Thank you. My only point is the legislature has been supportive of monies for civil legal services, but times change. And it's a question of priorities this year. And we're suggesting to you that maybe judicial salaries are more important than that area. But I would certainly never like to hear you say that you're going to cut more personnel from the judiciary budget for the administration of the courts, which are now not up to par where they should be in terms of the hours, the staffing. That would be really not a good thing to do.
I agree with you. We would be loath to do that. We're 2,000 employees fewer, as I mentioned in my remarks, than we were in 2009. And that has absolutely had consequences on the operation of the courts. And the last few years, we have finally been able to kind of get our heads above water and replace people when they leave, and maybe even slightly increase our employment level. But again, it's the last thing we would want to do, is to go back to the scenario of a few years ago where we were bleeding people, and when they left, that we couldn't replace them. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting that we would favor further reducing our employment level. It's the last thing we would want to do, but in the end, because our budget is overwhelmingly 90% salaries and fringe benefits, when we don't have sufficient money, that's really where we look, and we have no choice.
My only last comment is I believe that there's $15 million there in civil services that you should not give this year to make sure that the judges get their raises, which we all think they're entitled to. And I thank you very much, Your Honor, for coming today.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bonasek. We've been joined by Senator Thomas Croce, Chair of the Veterans, Homeland Security, and Military Affairs Committee, and also Senator Leroy Comrie. Chairman Farrell.
Yes, Mr. Oaks.
Yes, we've also been joined by Assemblyman Saladino.
Next to questions, Chairperson Weinstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Marks, a pleasure to see you here today. And as Senator Bonasek said, we work closely together, but in relation to the civil legal services, it's a point where we diverge in terms of this increase. And I just wanted to continue that discussion a little bit more. I looked at the the Task Force Permanent Commission's last report, and I just want to make sure that I read correctly that based on the Commission's finding that New York State realized $260 million in taxpayer savings in the form of reduced emergency shelter costs alone as a result of legal services. That was one of their
That's
findings?
correct. That's correct. Yeah.
And that the overall finding that the overall investment in civil legal services has resulted in an overall economic benefit to New York State of $2.4 billion through 2014?
Yeah, I think that's correct, and that goes to the point that I made a moment ago that investing in civil legal services, in the end, can save state and local government, significant amounts of money.
So if we were to if we were to cut out of the judiciary budget the $15 million for civil legal services and dedicate it to a different purpose, as my colleague suggests, it would actually cost New York State money in this next year going forward?
Yes, there have been studies by economists that have suggested that expenditures on civil legal services is cost effective.
And could you just maybe go into a tiny bit more detail as to how civil legal, the funding that's in the judiciary budget for civil legal services is allocated around the state, and perhaps restate some of the services, the kinds of populations that benefit from civil legal services?
Yeah, the money is divided up based on a formula. The 200%, each county's population that's less than 200% of the federal poverty level. The formula is based on that, so it's equally divided to the state's 62 counties based on that formula. And the money goes to really kind of the essentials of life, people who find themselves in court without a lawyer, or would otherwise find themselves in court without a lawyer, in landlord-tenant proceedings, so facing eviction, foreclosure proceedings where people are facing the potential loss of their home, victims of domestic violence in family offense proceedings in the family court receive lawyers under this program. I mentioned veterans are a significant component of the people who benefit from these services, veterans who may be facing eviction, facing foreclosure, seeking disability benefits. And so those are some of the examples of the types of people who benefit from this program in every county in the state.
And I was just wondering, from the court's perspective, how do unrepresented litigants impact the functioning of the courts, people who come in without an attorney?
Yeah, well, actually, I can speak personally for this because I sit, in addition to my administrative responsibilities, I sit in the Supreme Court, and I can tell you from the court's perspective and the judge's perspective, when someone comes in without a lawyer, it's just it's a night and day situation. You know, it's very difficult for the judge, because judges ethically can't advise litigants on the law. The court staff can't do that. You know, people are basically on their own. It's not an equal playing field, obviously, when that happens. It's not, I mean, my own view, which I know is shared by the new chief judge, is that the justice system just doesn't make sense when you have hundreds of thousands of people coming into court without a lawyer. Often face their opponents, often represented by lawyers. It's just, it's not a justice system that, you know, we could all be proud of, you know, when that's as serious a problem as it has been in New York.